Hey everyone, my name is Rahat. I hope you all are doing well. I am the host of the video series Mainframe Voices. As the name suggests, we are creating a video series where we gather different perspectives of experts on mainframe technology and mainframe modernization. Our goal is to highlight the importance and future of mainframe in today's technology landscape. In this episode of Mainframe Voices, we delve into the growing influence of open source within the mainframe industry, particularly through the lens of Open Mainframe Project. Open source has become a powerful force for innovation, collaboration, and modernization across the tech world, and its impact on mainframe is no exception. Our experts will explore how open source initiatives are driving change, fostering community, and pushing the boundaries of what mainframes can achieve. Join us as we uncover the ways in which open source is shaping the future of mainframe technology.
I suppose it's what I mentioned a moment ago. I think the people, do you know what I mean? The computer systems, hardware does what hardware does. Systems and programming languages are what they are. The thing that makes all of those hardware and software things do something is the people. You know, this stuff, code has to be written, systems have to be used effectively or not effectively, but in a certain way. So a mainframe system can only ever be as effective as its people. And I think open source is going to bring people from all different backgrounds and all different other systems into the mix with the mainframe. And it'll make the different systems work more effectively together. It'll bring different perspectives and different viewpoints from people on, distributed systems and various other systems. It'll bring different viewpoints where they can say, hey, what if we did something this way? And various mainframers will say, oh, we've never done it that way before. I didn't even think of that, and suddenly you've got a new idea. So I think the way that open source opens the mainframe up to all sorts of different perspectives and different people and their creativity and ideas and so forth is really going to escalate that evolution of the mainframe and how it's used and come up with new ways of using it and better ways of using it, more efficient ways of using it, et cetera, et cetera. I think I've made that point.
If you understand the history of the mainframe, another misconception that exists is that open source has been at the backbone of the mainframe since its inception, right? So in 1955, I think it was, and I'm sure people are going to yell at me if I got that wrong, when the first business class machine was launched, that's when Share was created. Share was created by, I think it was the top 13 or 18 organizations that had bought that first business class machine, and they realized that they didn't have anybody to help them. So they came together as a group to work together to help leverage that machine, right? And so is that not the core definition of open source? Right? These organizations came together, they built Share, and they started sharing technology. They started sharing, code and everything else. And if you follow that forward, you have things like CBT Tape, which is an open mainframe project at this point. That is what CBT Tape is, right? People writing code and donating it to the community, and then other members of the community either taking advantage of that code and or helping to enhance that code. Again, the definition of open source. So, now you come to current day and you have the Open Mainframe Project, you have Zoe, you have Glossa, you have all of these different projects within the Open Mainframe Project. That's just a continuation of what's been happening on the mainframe all along, right? It's just, it's just set in today's, world, if you will. And so I don't see that ever changing. I think that, it's been at the core of the mainframe this entire time. I don't see it going away. I'm just seeing it, continuing to grow, continuing to mold itself and change as our world demands it to.
I think the Open Mainframe project is it's an overdue initiative. Part of the challenge, I think, it exists with the perception of mainframes and applications running on mainframes being old. It's because the world evolved and open source really picked up, and open source communities are really the engine of innovation in technology. And it's because I create something, or myself with the group we create something, and then we have a use case in mind. But when this is open source, someone else may say, oh, actually, I could take part of this to solve a completely different problem. And then someone else says, oh, actually, I have a similar problem, maybe some add-ons. And suddenly open source can, or something that is coming from a small group thinking in 1 or 2 use cases, certainly can serve 10, 15, 20 use cases, some of which you haven't really thought about. And I think because mainframes historically have been expensive machines just used on enterprise environments and with proprietary tools, was left a bit behind because people were limited and couldn't really influence the evolution of tools and languages and ways of using. And I think these initiatives like the Open Mainframe Project start bringing the mainframe into that open community, which I think it's going to accelerate the use cases. And one thing that is great about the open source communities is people are really enthusiastic into solving problems and contributing back to community. This is going to change the way mainframes are perceived, and it's already changing. I've personally come across different attitudes from customers I've worked with, where they see the mainframe as part of their strategic estate. It's not the only thing, but the customers I've been working with really start thinking about the mix and match and picking the best of breed. And for the mainframes, because of all the advances in tooling and ability to modernize applications, ability to modernize data, ability to integrate with their cloud environments, it brought mainframe back into, it's a part of my solution. It's not just an old thing that is causing me problems.
As long as we have, as long as open source provides the options or the tool is available for all of us, I think it influences us to try it out. You know, since these open source projects are always free and and the customers or the mainframe engineers can directly talk to the developers of the open source project, it influences them to try it out and try it out to their systems. And when they try it out, they actually learn a lot, because when you try something new, you try to recall what is it that you learn from your past experiences, and then with that you share it with somebody else, you share it to the community. And as long as open source, Open Mainframe Project, even Open Telemetry has this mainframe work group right now that they are forming, and a lot of developers, mainframe developers now are working together. It influences us to find solutions or to find innovations, basically to innovate mainframe in general. And for me, that's a good thing. When I was working as a mainframer, mainframe and innovation is not a thing. You really can think about that. When you say innovation in mainframe, it's like, huh? How are you gonna do that? But now, mainframe and innovation goes hand in hand, and it's already there. We are already doing that, and so open source influences that innovation part, and I really love seeing that.
Open source today is a crucial component of the modern mainframe. I guess this started happening early 2000s as Linux became integrated into the platform. I think it was at BMC Software when that was starting to happen, and the whole company sort of turned on its axis and started looking at what we need to do to support and make sure that Linux works on the mainframe as well as it works on other platforms. So, Linux is there. It's used. People run Linux applications on the mainframe, and some of the things like the DB2 Analytics Accelerator, IDAA, it runs on IFLs. It's a Linux partition of your mainframe that then integrates with DB2. So more and more, we see vital open source software like this being part and parcel of what is running your mainframe, and it's kind of open it up to more users and more developers who are more familiar with that open source stuff that runs on other platforms.
Within the mainframe industry is, for me, mostly innovation with respect to governance, and it's all those vendors that are living in this space are coming together and build together a better future for the platform, and then competing on other things. So effectively for me, and I think it's kind of what's happened in the distributed world as well, the open source allowed the companies to build one infrastructure layer that's shared by everyone in the space. And then after this infrastructure layer is in place, then you can differentiate and sell whatever services you have. But it means that there is one, it's documented, it's standardized, it makes it easier to interact with the mainframe. It doesn't matter so much which specific vendor and which specific solution you are using, because lots of the things are standardized behind REST APIs, CLI tools. When you are developing, you are using it through the VS Code extensions. If you are talking about the testing at scale, then things like fail-on are making it easier for you. So I think it will have a large space in the platform. I think it's a great opportunity for developers to collaborate and learn more. And also it's a great opportunity for everyone from developers to product people to shine outside their companies and help their company succeed.
Before open source came along, you would run a piece of software and you had no idea how it had been authored, right? So that was a problem, because if it broke, you didn't know why it broke. So it's very hard to do diagnostic. And it was also very difficult as well to understand it, right? So people started providing their source code with it as well, which makes it a lot easier. When something crashes and it breaks, if it says, oh, I broke at line 74 because a value was 0 when it shouldn't have been. If you look at the source code, you can think, oh, I now understand why that occurred. So open source for me started as a way for people to publish information. Over time, the most successful open source projects that I've ever worked in, I often say to people, open source is not just read only, it's read write, where people take open source, but the open source is authored by the people who use it. It's a bit like if you make yourself dinner and then you eat your dinner, you can think, oh, you know what, next time I need to add a little bit more chili powder, or next time I need to add, maybe cook it a little bit longer or something like that, right? So if you become the consumer and then you're able to be the creator as well, you end up with what you're creating being more fit for purpose. You don't have to go back and deal with a vendor, give them some money, buy the next version of software. So I think open source flourishes where it's a very tight loop between the people that create something and use it and then give back. And it can be suggestions, or it can be code or patches or something like that. And that's where open source thrives. So it's very much a sort of democratization of software. It stops one particular software vendor or one company having control, proprietary, all of a sudden jacking up the price or doing something nasty. And it also means you've got lots of eyes on a software package, which means if somebody sees a vulnerability, they can fix it as a community, which sometimes can be very expensive. So there's a phrase, and I think it was Jeff Bezos, who's from Amazon, and he said open source. Somebody said to him, well, why have you open sourced? Why have AWS open sourced so much stuff? And he said it's undifferentiated heavy lifting. Certain problems cannot be solved by one developer or one group of developers or one company alone. Like encryption is very, very difficult. Single sign-on is very, very difficult to do. It's much, rather than having lots of people do it, it's much better if it's done once and shared and collaborated, and then everybody can make value by doing something more interesting and going higher up the value chain. So I think open source always pushes the boundaries as to what people will pay for, which means that what you get better value for money, right? Because as more things become free and shared, all that's left to monetize is higher value. So I think open source advances humanity from the sort of ground up.
Two answers here. I think the first answer is very similar to how we're dealing with Galata. So I think, and I hope we will see more projects that come along that are developed in very similar ways to every other open source project, using all the same pipelines, automation tools, using skills from people that aren't familiar with the mainframe in order to access data and do things on the mainframe. So the way that we do it with Galata is that our team aren't necessarily mainframe experts, but they create managers or pieces of tool and pieces of code that do interact with the mainframe, so that you can extend that both directions out into the cloud world and into the mainframe world. So I think that's the first thing, is bringing people that aren't familiar with the mainframe into that world, but using the same technology. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is about how we empower the users. So the people that are buying the mainframe and using it for their day-to-day workload, how do we empower them to contribute back into open source, or to maybe create inner source projects within their own communities, so that so for example, if a customer had lots of different teams and one team came up with a really great way of doing something, how do they share that within their organization so that they're able to it's not kind of, oh, my team does this really specific thing and I have to do that forever. We can share that around. I think that's really important, bringing the users into the open source contributors, because for me, I don't think that open source doesn't exist without the users, but it also doesn't exist without the contributors. And so when the user becomes the contributor, you kind of get this sweet spot in the middle where you understand how it's being used, but also they can contribute feature requests and things that they want to see that undoubtedly other customers and users will want to see as well.
I was listening to a presentation this morning that Elizabeth Joseph was doing on Open Mainframe Project, and how she's been involved with Linux distributions as different Linux distribution working group in the OMP. Linux on Z, whatever your pronunciation of that is, has opened up a lot of innovation with open source software like Galasa. I personally am a big fan of Zoe, and you may be going to be asking me a question about that in a minute, but I think the Zoe phenomenon is a good word, has fostered development and interest in developing for the mainframe. The younger people who are not used to the traditional ISPF green screen way of accessing the mainframe and its infrastructure. Sort of the Zoe development has made it more modern, more with a better look and feel. Not to say that other not open source but proprietary software is bad in any way at all. I mean, after all, I work for BMC and we've developed our own mainframe modernization tools which aren't open source. But I certainly think there is an opportunity for synergy between software developers and open source developers on the mainframe.
Firstly, I think it's helping mainframe development, or just access to the mainframe, to become more accessible to people from any technical background or experience level. I think that with there being so many open source tools for the mainframe nowadays, it means that someone can get involved in this domain of technology without necessarily having to work for a mainframe department like I do, or like many people do. You can get involved in open source technology whenever you want. So I think it's making it more accessible. I also think that, where you have as I mentioned before, where you have these features of the mainframe that have been around for so many years, and that's why they're so reliable, and it's really the foundation of what the mainframe does, we're then being able to build on top of that foundation layer with all of these different tools that's, either help you develop on the mainframe, or help you test the mainframe, or help you do things on the mainframe. We're being able to build on top of that foundational layer that's been around for a long time, with all these brand new tools that are open to, for anyone to contribute to, for anyone to use freely without having to pay massive amounts. I think it's brilliant. I think as I say, it's really opening the door for many more people to be able to use and understand exactly what mainframes are about, basically.
Thing is bringing alignment between what the rest of the industry is using and what the mainframe world is using, because the tools are different. And I think by bridging the gap there, by having tooling like Zoe, which allows you to have a more modern environment and integrate with a lot of the tools that developers and infrastructure folks are using in the broader ecosystem, is going to be really important. Also bringing in sort of the testing infrastructures that project like Galasa bring in, making sure that those testing infrastructures work with the rest of the organization, but are tuned to specifically run with mainframe workloads. That's going to be really important as well. And so I think the big word for me is just integration with these different toolings, and what the industry uses is predominantly open source.
Open source software and tools are driving innovation and modernization within the mainframe ecosystem. And projects like Zoe, an open source framework for developing and managing mainframe applications, are making it easier to integrate mainframes into modern DevOps pipelines and cloud native applications. In this case, first of all, I am also an LFX mentee, so I would be trying out different things to implement something on a mainframe. We are working on COBOL. So how we are doing it? We are not using a terminal window. Like in the earlier days, we used to see 30 to 70 emulator. Now we have the emulator for that, but it's not required. The modern developers would be using a Zoe extension for either VS Code or IntelliJ, and it works fine. It's really good, and it's targeted for the next generation of mainframers. And that's where open source kicks in. Open source encourages collaboration among developers, vendors, and users across the mainframe industry. And this collaboration fosters the sharing of best practices, development of newer features, and rapid adoption of emerging technologies within the mainframe space. Adopting open source solution can reduce the cost associated with the proprietary software license and vendor lock-in period. So one of the good examples for this would be running Linux on IBM Z, which we say as Linux One. And we also have a Linux One community cloud where the cost is just for the infrastructure and not for the licensing cost of the software. But if someone is using, if an organization is opting for IBM ZOS platform, which is the premier operating system, then they have to pay for the yearly subscription, they have to pay for the annual subscription as well. Then open source technology facilitates integration between mainframes and hybrid cloud or multi-cloud environments. So projects like Kubernetes and OpenShift enables orchestration and containerization of the application across diverse IT architectures, including the mainframes, cloud platforms, and the general on-premise infrastructure. Open source initiatives provide opportunities for developers to acquire skills in mainframe technologies, contribute to a broader and more diverse talent pool. This helps to address the skills gap in the mainframe industry and promotes knowledge sharing among the professionals. And this is what exactly the LFX mentorship program, the Open Mainframe Project mentorship, is doing.
I think we all need to look at open source in the right way. If we think about OpenShift, think about open source capabilities that have the right support behind them. It's absolutely critical that we're not just picking some package off the internet that nobody's maintaining. So we need to look at open source from a security standpoint and making sure we're using the right open source packages. But if we think about that and we think about the Z environment, it can run a Linux environment, it can run an OpenShift environment. And so all of that open source valuable capability can run on the Z platform. And I expect to see more and more packages being built for Z. As it is, many packages already run there. Many AI packages, many open source packages already run there. As I said, OpenShift already runs there. So having more and more people understand that they really can run that open source on the Z platform to be able to take advantage of its sustainability characteristics, its scale up characteristics. I also see the open source world as helping drive the developer experience. And if we think about using Git, though everybody uses a provider of Git, but if we think about Git and development practices and VS Code and all the plugins and Eclipse and all the plugins there, we drive the same developer experience, whether or not I'm doing open source packages or I'm doing COBOL or PL1. And so having that experience be very similar so that, or the same from an experience standpoint, having pipelines such as Tecton or whatever, be able to drive that developer experience in a consistent way. And so I think it's driving a number of factors that will include Z, just because it's open source, it probably runs there too. And so making sure we think about it as a full life cycle of platform, and making sure we get the capabilities where they should be running. Everything shouldn't run on Z. There are things that should run next to the user. There are things that I want to run on my phone. There are things that you want to run in cloud next to a user. So putting the right work in the right place, and with open source and with common deployment techniques, it's much easier to deploy it wherever you want to.
From my point of view, innovation cannot happen without collaboration. We meet us every year at one or two conferences and share our knowledge there, so we can share our experience and everything else and what we are doing there. So the Linux distribution working group, as an example, knows the SOWI project and our ways. And in my case, the Linux distribution working group contains not only one Linux distribution, we are many Linux distributions. On this way, we can achieve that we can work faster on issues together, share our knowledge, how we are solving problems, and that we can put together solutions. PM is contributing there also, and on this way we can achieve a working environment on every Linux distribution. And with the collaboration within the Open Mainframe project, we can have a benefit with sharing our and integrating also our solutions into our Linux environment, as an example.
It's going to influence significantly. We are late to the game, in my opinion. See, with a personal computer, you and I can go out to the market, buy a computer, and start working on it. And that gave people across the world the opportunity to innovate and be a contributor to one cause. And the open source programs, that's when many people came together. Many of us didn't have that option for mainframe. Nowadays, we have more options to collaborate in mainframe, so we are late in the game. But it's very important, because that's when multiple minds will come together and they'll contribute new ideas, and the development will get much faster and faster. It's starting to get now, and it's going to get better. It's starting to get now, and it's going to get better.